Hi, this is Kate from Generate Magic. So I've been a little bit quiet on this channel recently, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But the main reason is because there's been some things going on in my life recently that I haven't been that happy about. And I've been really feeling disillusioned recently with manifestation and just everything that goes along with it. But I've had some breakthroughs recently that I thought would be very beneficial to share with you as well, especially if you've ever had moments in your life where you felt disillusioned by manifestation or by anything really. And yeah, just disillusioned in general. I think it's something that all of us go through at some point or another. And so anyway, a few months ago, so first of all, to give you some context, I'm a freelance copywriter, so that's, kind of what I do for a living. And I've been doing this probably for a good decade now, and become pretty successful at it. And so a few months ago, I lost one of my major clients. And so this is a retainer client, which basically means that they pay you a steady amount every month. And so in the freelance world, this is a very valuable thing to have. And because it's something, so losing it was basically kind of like losing a job. Only because it's freelance, I couldn't really count on receiving unemployment checks or anything like that, which is really just as well. I have been on unemployment in the past, and I think it's a little bit of a trap. And so anyway, this is just to kind of give you some context for the situation. And so this was so the client was basically like a big company, and I think the company is kind of going under, and so there were massive layoffs within the company. Pretty much everybody in the marketing department, including my boss, was laid off. And so it wasn't just me. And at first I wasn't really too concerned. I was like, this is all part of the unfolding and something else is going to come through. But after a while, when still nothing was coming through, I began to get a little concerned. And I was like, so I went back kind of to my old way of doing things, which was to hustle and just to hustle and grind and just try as hard as I could to get some more clients and just go into full-on hustle mode. And still nothing was really coming through. And at this point, I was starting to go into fear. I was starting to go into desperation. And so this kind of ties into what I was discussing in a recent short that I did, where the number one cause of suffering is never about the situation itself, right? But it's all the stories that we pile onto the situation, and it really comes to resisting whatever's happening in the moment. And so I was going into fear mode. I was kind of fearing for my financial security, thinking, what if it's just always going to be like this? I was making up all sorts of stories about myself and my worthiness, and also because I knew about this stuff, right? And yet somehow I still couldn't, quote unquote, manifest my way out of it. And I wasn't generating the magic. And so I was just feeling very frustrated with myself. And I was also just feeling very frustrated with all these principles that I learned that I felt like were letting me down. And so this fear began to be kind of projected outward, and this was kind of like a gradual process, sort of over all of this kind of took place over the period of a few months. And so all this kind of fear and desperation and scarcity mentality, and so it became projected outward, and that I started to see it show up in other areas of my life. And so I had another copywriting client, also a long-term client, a retainer client, really, really excellent client. And I began to see the work that they were giving me, I began to see a huge downturn in it. And at first I wasn't too concerned because it started over the summer, and summers are typically very slow, so I wasn't too worried. But then when the fall rolled around, I began to think, okay, something's going on. I should be getting more work. And then I actually got an email from the company saying that they had a very tight budget, and so they were having to cut back in the amount of assignments that they assigned. And so they drastically cut back on the amount of work that I was getting. And basically my income slowed down to a trickle, to the point where I was pretty much just having to kind of live off savings. And I'm grateful that at least I had the savings, but the situation in my mind, of course, like I said, I had the savings. It really wasn't that bad of a situation, right? I know there's people out there that have been in way worse situations, including people like in my own family. And so it wasn't the end of the world, but the stories that I was making up about it in my mind, you would think it was the end of the world. And I was spiraling a lot. I was having lots of emotional breakdowns. And then I was getting mad at myself for spiraling and having emotional breakdowns. So as you can see, it was just this kind of vicious cycle that I was creating for myself. But one of the things that really got me through all of this was just staying consistent with A Course in Miracles and doing the daily exercises. And because really the whole thing behind A Course in Miracles is just kind of getting you in touch with your true self and getting you in touch with that pure awareness that remains untouched behind all of these changing conditions. And changing, I think, is the key word here, and this is something that I'm going to kind of reinforce throughout this video, because it's also whenever we think a situation is fixed, right? Like it's just going to be like that forever, and it can start to feel very solid in our minds, and that's also kind of what creates the struggle and what creates this resistance, right? And so yeah, and so I was once I kind of got back to A Course in Miracles, I began to feel much calmer and much more peaceful about the situation. And I began to kind of see the bigger picture and, just kind of seeing, the greater reality behind it all, and just realizing, this too shall pass, essentially. And just kind of recognizing that things are always moving. And if there's one thing in this human experience that we can count on, it's change, right? That change is a constant. And so then once I kind of started feeling calmer, I started to come back to some of these manifestation techniques. And so one of them was, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, robotic affirming. And, I was a little bit skeptical, and I had kind of tried it in the past, hadn't really had much success, but I was like, you know what, it's free, it's not going to hurt anything. And I had heard on Sammy Ingram's channel, I had heard her do some success stories that really kind of encouraged me. So, and I go for a walk every day, and the walk lasts about an hour. And on top of that, I do my dance meditations, and every day I'm doing cooking and cleaning, chores around the house. And so that all adds up to lots of hours, during the day. And it's like, instead of wasting those hours just kind of railing against my conditions or feeling sorry for myself or worrying or, feeling anxious about my situation, I could spend it, focus on what I want. And this is something that I want to kind of bring up too, is, when we look at manifestation teachings, and whether it's books on manifestation or, just random videos on YouTube, I think we can all kind of, even between the law of assumption and the law of attraction, and there's so much conflicting advice out there, right? But I think it all kind of boils down to one thing, right? And it's all about kind of what you focus on, and then that becomes kind of your dominant life experience, right? And so anyway, I really like blanket affirmations, like "isn't it wonderful" would be an example. And so the blanket affirmation that I used was, "Why is my life so perfect?" And because I like blanket affirmations, because to me it is more about kind of a general overall lifestyle and feeling happy with life, more than it is about any one specific thing. And So at first I did what I think a lot of us do with these processes, right? Like we're doing them and we're kind of priding ourselves on how disciplined we're being. And then we're kind of looking out there and, seeing if anything's changed in our, in our current outer circumstances. And so I was doing a lot of that, but at the same time, even when I really didn't see much change on the outside, I decided to stick with it because I just felt much calmer and happier and just kind of this sense of peace whenever I would say the affirmations. And I would get like a lot of visuals as well, and just kind of like visualizing this whole idea of what a perfect life would be like. And the funny thing is that the more I said it, the more I started to see that it was true, and not from a place of force, right? Not from a place of trying to force myself into living in the end, or believing it's real or it's done, or any of those catchphrases we hear, in the manifestation community, right? It didn't come from any like sort of tricks or forcing myself or anything like that, but rather it came organically. And yeah, just like as I was going on these walks, and it's always kind of like as the sun was setting, and the sunsets in Texas are just beautiful, and there would always be like these kind of mosaics in the sky, and I was like, you know what, my life is perfect, and at least in that moment. But really, this moment is all you have. And I used to get so annoyed when people would talk about the present and people would talk about appreciating the moment. But it's so true, right? This moment is really all we have. And it's really when we start to kind of project our, in the words of A Course in Miracles, project our grievances onto the moment. And once again, to kind of resist what is, and to bring all our disempowering stories into the equation, that we start to suffer, right? And I was like, yeah, my life, it really is perfect in many ways. And by this I mean kind of seeing this divine perfection, right? That's kind of behind everything. And this again kind of connects to the truth of who you are, right? And recognizing that Tom, a Be Something Wonderful, put it really well. He says the 3D conditions, right? The physical conditions of your human experience, they're never going to be exactly the way you want them to be, right? And to kind of expand on this, the way I kind of tied it all together is the reason that it's never going to be exactly the way you want it to be is because it's always changing, right? So it would be kind of like making up your bed and thinking, oh wow, my bed, it looks so perfect. And then, that night you have to like undo all the progress that you just made because you're going to sleep in your bed again and feeling all frustrated about it. And oh, now my bed doesn't look perfect anymore. And so it would be kind of like that, right? And even though, when I use that analogy, we recognize that it's not really logical, at the same time, we do a lot of times kind of rail against our circumstances and our thoughts and all these things that are changing, right? And trying to kind of smooth it out and get it just the way we want it to. And it's just like an exercise in frustration and futility. Instead of just kind of going with the flow, just recognizing, I always like to kind of go back to this idea that I am a divine being having a human experience. And so always keeping my eye on the bigger picture, on the greater reality behind it all, but at the same time kind of embracing the full spectrum of emotion and of experience. And I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. As much as we would just like everything to be able to control everything in our lives and everything to always go exactly according to plan, if in fact our lives actually work that way, we would get bored really quickly. And so, and the more you kind of embrace the process, and the more you keep recognizing that yes, there's always movements and things are always changing. And even when you feel like things aren't moving. And so that's exactly what I did. And so sure enough, my circumstances did take a turn for the better. And like in my work situation. And so the company, all of a sudden, things started just popping off, and they started just sending me a bunch of assignments, and suddenly I felt like in demand again. And I even kind of like asked them, well, what's changed? And they told me, they said the previous statement that they had made about cutbacks was a miscommunication. And I think that's so significant, right? I think this kind of gets into the whole idea of just kind of telling ourselves that, and this kind of ties into A Course in Miracles too, that anytime we're really struggling or really feel like we're suffering, just reminding ourselves that appearances are not what they seem, right? And so many issues, so many relationship conflicts can be caused, right, because of these miscommunications. And like somebody says something in a certain tone and we take it the wrong way, we take it personally, or we see, our significant other talking to another potential love interest, and we get jealous, and it turns out we just kind of misinterpreted the whole situation, right? And so yeah, so it's kind of recognizing, it's being open to the idea that appearances, when they're unfavorable, right, that they're not what they seem, that we're the ones ultimately that create the meaning in our reality. And this doesn't mean controlling, again, and it doesn't mean we're able to control every single thing that happens to us, but we are able to control how we interpret it and how we respond to it, right? And it's always just kind of going back to this kind of unwavering commitment to enjoy the hell out of my life no matter what. And I was like, okay, I'm done. And this is before the work started flowing and the money. Oh yeah, and they also want to make me their social media manager now. So things are really just picking up with this company, but it's not just about the situation. I really want you to get the larger message behind it, because even when before things were picking up with the job, when things were still very uncertain in terms of this job and in terms of my finances, I was like, okay, I'm done allowing this to ruin my life. I'm done moping and complaining and worrying about money, and I'm just gonna enjoy my life. I'm just gonna, obviously I'm still gonna, apply myself. I'm still going to look for work. I'm still going to essentially follow the script, right? But at the same time, I'm going to keep my eye focused on the prize, on my ideal, and I'm going to keep just doing the things that I love, and even doing more things that I love. And, I've been watching a lot of comedy recently. I've really gotten into the show 2.5 Men, and just kind of am reconnecting with friends and really just enjoying life, right? Because it's, sure, I firmly believe, that this life is just one train stop, but at the same time, we might as well just enjoy it while it's here. And one other thing, I had also made a short about this, but I also want to discuss this again, because this is something that I think affects many people, and it's insomnia. And so thankfully, for most of my life, I've always been a pretty good sleeper, but every once in a while, I'll kind of get in this loop where I just can't sleep. And I use the word loop, right? Because it very much becomes kind of a loop in your mind where you have a couple of sleepless nights, right? And then, at least for me, like, I started to worry. I started to think, oh no, maybe this is just the way it's always going to be. And this kind of goes back to the whole idea of resisting what is. And so in and of itself, yes, obviously we need sleep, for health and everything, but in and of itself, sleep, like if I was just kind of sitting here on a normal afternoon, right, I wouldn't be railing about the fact that I couldn't sleep. So it's all just the story that we make up about the situation. And thinking about how much the next day was going to suck, worrying that I had a serious condition, worrying that this was never going to end. none of this was helping my insomnia. It was just making it that much worse. And finally I was like, okay, I'm just going to be chill with it. If I can't sleep, first I'm going to just kind of lay there and do some robotic affirmations and see if that helps me get to sleep. And then if a while goes by and I still feel restless, then I'll listen to some guided meditations. I'll take the opportunity to read A Course in Miracles, and usually one of those things would eventually fall asleep. And when I first initially made the realization that, wait, I'm just making this was after weeks and weeks, probably over 2 months of kind of consistent insomnia. And I finally kind of came to the realization, okay, it's my resistance to the situation that's making it that much worse than it needs to be. And so as soon as I came to the realization, and it was at night when I made this realization, I still didn't sleep very well that night. But at the same time, I kind of acknowledged, I was a little bit irritable, a little bit on edge the next day, like typical when you don't get a lot of sleep. But at the same time, it wasn't the end of the world. I was still able to function. And so I was like, okay, this seeming issue isn't nearly as bad as I'm making it out to be. It's going to be just fine. And once I kind of came to that conclusion, it's been much better after that. I wouldn't say it's been completely perfect because, like I said before, the 3D conditions is never going to be exactly the way you want it to be. But I would say it's much, much better than it was before. And what I really want to emphasize is it's my relationship with the situation that's vastly improved. And so that's, I think, another thing that I really want you to take away from this video is it's always kind of choosing how you're going to relate to the situation, whether it's money or health or relationships. And this is kind of why I had become a little bit disillusioned with the manifestation community, because some of these teachers make it kind of seem like, you just do this process and then it works like clockwork, and it works exactly the same for everybody that does it. It's the laws is one thing they always like to say, and within just a few days, everything in your life is just going to be back to perfect again. And from at least I don't think these people are necessarily lying. I think anything is possible, right? But in my experience, it doesn't always work that way. So that's what was creating a lot of my disillusionment and just a lot of my frustration in general. But once I kind of came back to this idea of just reminding myself of the divine perfection behind everything, and the conditions themselves, they're always changing. And so just to kind of have faith in that, and nothing's fixed, nothing's permanent. It's hardly ever as bad, as you think it is. And even then, things can always change in an instant. And it's kind of like I think a sports cliche, but even just last night, right? I was watching the World Series with my dad, and it looked like the Texas Rangers, they were going to lose for sure. I thought it was pretty much a lost cause. And then in the very end, one of the players for the Rangers, he hit a home run, and there just happened to be another player on base. And so that ended up tying up the game, and then they ended up winning in the 11th inning. And so that just kind of proves, right, that everything can change in an instant. And just kind of always keeping your eye on the bigger picture. I think that's the most important takeaway. And so with that, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.